Okay, so it's election time in America, and I'm here in Washington, D.C., in the very fancy studio of my friend, the well-known ghazal singer, Mehdi Hassan.
Of course, always.
Always.
I passed away a few years ago.
Yes, you did. But jokes apart, it's funny, I think maybe up to even 10 years ago, if one had said Mehdi Hassan to the folks back home from India, which is where you're from Hyderabad, I believe.
No, my parents are from Hyderabad.
Parents from Hyderabad. They would have thought of the late, great Mehdi Hassan. But you just blown up since then. I think you have to be living under a rock not to have seen your stuff with Al Jazeera, MSNBC, now with Zeteo. And you are like, I think this time, particularly for you, like with the elections and the war, has been quite extraordinary. But it's interesting because I was thinking about it, like, it's almost as if there's this moment that South Asians are having.
Yeah.
Not just here, but in England, like Desis were never cool, right? They were always doctors and the IT guys and like corner stores.
Doctors.
Yeah. But now you have South Asian superheroes. You have like, I mean, like I say superheroes, I mean like playing superheroes.
Yeah. Marvel.
Miss Marvel. You've got a a South Asian or a Pakistani Miss Marvel.
You got a Prime Minister in the UK who had a disastrous run, but was one of ours.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That was counterintuitive.
And now, of course,
you might have
President Harris.
Yes, you might have President Harris. But when you got into when you anchored MSNBC, were you the first or the second South Asian anchor on a mainstream, like a US network?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't looked back far enough to know what other South Asians. I mean, look, at MSNBC.
It's Ali Velshi.
So Ali Velshi he is of South Asia, via Kenya and Canada.
Right.
But yes, and there was three of us Muslim anchors for sure.
Yeah.
It was me, Ali, and Ayman Mohyuddin.
Sure.
Of Palestinian Egyptian heritage.
Yeah.
Two of us, were on the same night.
Right.
Handovers to each other, Ayman and I, which was a lot of fun.
Right.
But yes, I mean, we have representation from all sorts of different backgrounds slowly growing in the US media. It's a tragedy that it's taken a very long time for a very white media to open its doors. There's always been good African-American representation in recent decades. Right?
Yes.
People have understood the need to get the Black community the representation they deserve.
Sure.
But that hasn't extended to, for example, the Latino community, which is going to be one of the biggest communities in the United States.
Yeah.
If you look at the New York Times op-ed page today, anchors, there's not many Hispanic Latino anchors. So those of us who are brown need to really get in line.
Yeah, that's true. So anyway, we're here now. This is very nice. This is the studio that you were telling me you hired to do your Zeteo stuff.
Yes.
And by all accounts, Zeteo seems to be doing very well. But I still feel like you're kind of like me. Like we're both mainstream guys. Like that's all I've done for 30 years. And that's what you've done for a good number of years. Maybe not that many.
24
years. Close. But why can't a Mehdi Hassan be on a mainstream US platform? Like I know the whole thing that happened with MSNBC. Is it a structural problem, or is it like an individual HR thing that happened?
That's a big question. I think there's a structural issue with the media in general on both sides of the Atlantic. I've worked in the UK and I've worked in the US.
Yeah.
To quote Greg Dyke, the former head of the BBC, it's a hideously white media. That was his famous phrase. Look, institutional issues, you know what this means, structural issues. It doesn't mean that individual bosses are racist. It means the industry as a whole has not figured out how to make sure that there is diversity and representation for minority communities. As I say, some organizations are trying, NBC clearly trying. When I joined, Joy Reid became the first Black woman anchor on primetime.
Right.
There was people like me and Ayman were given shows. And I had a great run for 3.5 years. That changed after October 7th. They canceled my shows. And I decided, they said, stay and be a guest anchor and carry on doing analysis. And, I enjoyed sitting in for primetime anchors. It was a lot of fun. I always say it's like driving your parents give you the keys to the nice car. You take it out for a spin. The primetime shows with millions of viewers. And I got to do that, to be fair.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I needed a platform for myself to say what I had to say, especially in this year, 2024, election year, genocide year.
Sure.
I needed a regular platform. So now I have Zeteo, which I built. I get to say my piece. I get to have a weekly show here. I get to do a podcast, etc., etc. Freedom is good.
No. I'm sure it is. And look, like I said, it's great to have all of this, but there's still something about the mainstream platform which has its own cachet.
And I still appear on CNN,
you still appear.
MSNBC, and the BBC, etc.
Right. No, so I was trying to get to like the fact that they actually had to cancel, they had to drop your show, and I know you've spoken about it. You kind of danced around it a bit. You've talked about
I may do some dancing.
You may do some dancing today. You can tell me in Hindi, by the way. That no one will know.
Then no one will know.
आप
There'll be no
हिंदी
Google
में बता दीजिए कि MSNBC के साथ क्या हुआ.
मैं नहीं बोल सकता.
Okay, but seriously, within what you can tell me, so was that the clear line though? Because you were on the up and up. You're doing your show.
Yeah.
October 7th happens. You start doing some hardball interviews with Israeli spokespersons and whatnot. And then within 2 weeks, your show gets dropped.
Yeah, and that's the timeline. So people can look at the timeline, draw whatever conclusions they want. I can only
Come on, I come all the way from India. You're going to give me something.
I can only
the homeland, the homeland wants more answers.
Indians always want the gossip.
They always want gossip.
Look, I don't do gossip. I'm going to say that I had a great time at MSNBC.
Okay.
Obviously, I was disappointed when they canceled the shows.
Right.
My journalism on Israel speaks for itself. To be fair, I was very critical of Israel before October 7th. I was critical of Israel after October the 7th. And as I say, they canceled the shows. They said you can stay on as a guest anchor and on a pundit. I needed to be able to have a platform of my own where I could just say what I wanted to say. There's
all this.
And I'm actually feeling good about not being at corporate media in a year like this because I do. And I think the reaction to Zeteo, the number of subscribers we've had, both in the US, the UK, in India, we have a good chunk of subscribers. I think that is a reaction from people who are saying, you know what, we're fed up with the corporate media. We want some independent journalism.
So when you quit, and there are all these people who are coming out and saying that's outrageous, especially people on the left, liberals, progressives, the right to saying it wasn't because of Israel. It wasn't because you were a difficult customer. It was because of ratings.
Yeah, that was bullshit.
Right.
At the time I posted our ratings, we were beating CNN. We were beating the same average as everyone else on the network. Look, Sunday night is a graveyard slot for my show. I had a weekly show on the streaming channel, and on the cable channel I had a Sunday night slot. But we, on Sunday nights, you're up against award ceremonies and football games. Everyone knows. Anyone who knows anything about cable news ratings knows Sunday nights are a graveyard slot. Within that graveyard slot, me and my friend Eamon did very well. As I said, we were beating CNN. We were posting some great numbers. And by the way, social media, which all of the corporations claim they care about, the online audience, the future, the non-cable, non-linear audience, I don't think anyone disputes that our little show was doing better than all the primetime shows, doing better than some of the biggest shows on CNN, Fox, MSNBC. Our numbers on YouTube, on TikTok, on Twitter, blasted 99% of the other shows out of the water.
Right.
And we continue to do so at Zeteo, by the way. Some of our clips are in the millions of views on Instagram. If people want to follow us, let's do a shameless plug.
I'm a small business.
I'm no longer just a journalist. I'm a small business owner. You've got to let me be the capitalist and make quick plugs and ads for products.
Go for it. The reason I'm also getting into this is not just because of gossip, that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's also because through your journey to sort of understand what's going on with the American media, especially when it comes to Gaza, especially the Gaza story, especially when it comes to the elections.
And I've been very open about the American media's failures on Gaza.
No, I know. And I'll come to that in a second, because what is interesting to me is I was reading this piece about you, I think it was in New York Magazine, which talked about how, so Al Sharpton, I don't know how you describe Al Sharpton to a Desi audience.
Very hard.
Very hard.
Pastor, priest, activist, politician, TV anchor, troublemaker.
Anyway.
Big trouble, he would say.
Right. So he comes on the breakfast show on MSNBC and he says to Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League, which is a pro-Israel pressure group, who's also on the show, and he says to him, I know you've had a very positive conversations with people here at the top of the network in MSNBC, and I think that the leadership here understands that in your, as in Greenblatt's conversations. This is around the time all of this stuff was happening, when MSNBC was facing heat from the Israeli lobby. That seems quite blatant, no?
I mean, it is very blatant in this country. Jonathan Greenblatt, and not just Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL, but a lot of groups, pro-Israeli Jewish community groups, and we should be clear, a lot of Jewish community groups are not pro-Israeli. We have a lot of young groups like JVP, and if not now, who are very critical of Israel. But the mainstream establishment organizations are very proudly Zionist and pro-Israel. And yet, they've never hidden the fact that they have very good relations with media organizations, with politicians. They have leverage, they have influence, they have meetings. And this is not conspiratorial. This is not, I'm not even saying this in a negative way. I would say to the Muslim community, to the Arab American community, to the left, that actually you should aspire to have those kind of relations and that kind of influence and that kind of leverage. You should be able to have, a foot in the door with CEOs and media executives. After October the 7th, Jonathan Greenblatt talked about, I think in Hollywood Reporter, one of these trade publications, about going to Hollywood and talking to filmmakers and actors and spreading the message. Where are the people on the other side of that? Are they, are people in Hollywood or in Congress or in C-suite boardrooms, are they being exposed to the pro-Palestinian narratives in the way they are being exposed to the pro-Israel narrative? No is the answer.
Okay, but I'm curious about why they would be like that ability of these the media organizations
Yeah.
to actually respond to that pressure. It's one thing for Israel, Israeli lobby to push hard, but why do you think that they actually get their way, or at least manage to get some of their way?
Yeah.
I mean, if one is drawing a line between that conversation and what happened with you.
I think it's a multiplicity of factors. And you look at recently at the CBS story with Ta-Nehisi Coates. We had him on the show sitting where you're sitting about the ridiculous interview they did with him, which caused huge uproar within CBS. And, you know, some of the reporting that Zeteo's done on that reveals that actually a lot of the executives, they don't even need to be lobbied or pressured. They're just pro-Israel in their own politics, right? And, you know, they have a history of philanthropy when it comes to Israel. They have a history of supporting Israel. They have a history of being on the right of the political spectrum. So, you know, some people just say, you know, for example, when you talk about politics, people on the left are like, well, it's AIPAC and the donations. Of course, that plays a role. The lobby plays a role. But it's actually much more, I don't want to say complicated, but much more widespread than that. People have ideological affinity with Israel and a narrative of, you know, fighting a war on terrorism. There's people who are just, a lot of the people in the media, I often say this, they're not ideologues. They're just people who want to get ahead and they want to keep their head down. You know this from working in Indian media as well. There are some people who just don't want any trouble. Right? So when you talk about the pro-Israel, why is the pro-Israel lobby able to cause some trouble? They're great at causing trouble. They're great at making noise. They've been doing this for years. And a lot of people, and I'm not just media executives, members of Congress I've spoken to will say, I agree with you, but you know what? I need a quiet week. I got to sign this letter they asked me to sign. If I don't sign, I have to then explain myself, put out a statement. I get people knocking on my doors, phone calls to my office. So a lot of
While on the other side, there is no such counterweight.
There is. It's small and growing, but doesn't have the same history, legacy, power, wealth, access. No, not in the same way. But now you are seeing there is pressure. You've seen the protests in D.C. You've seen the sit-ins from Jewish activists in Congress.
But do you see that shifting the media narrative now with a year into the war, with the body count piling, with now Lebanon in the mix?
Very slightly. Not in the kind. I am seeing shifts, but not in a way that makes the kind of difference. Given the scale of the atrocities and the crimes, no, the shift in the media doesn't match, just like with the shift in politics. Right? There is slow growth. But as I said to someone recently, do the people of Gaza have time to wait for American media and politics to shift? I think it is shifting. I think generationally, 100% it's shifting. I mean, you look at the polls right now, I always tell people this. If you want to understand whether an American is pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, the number one indicator is not party affiliation, not whether you're Republican or Democrat, not your religion, not whether you're Muslim, Jewish or Christian, it's your age, right? Age is, you look at the numbers, it's astonishing. Over 50s, pro-Israel. Under 40s, pro-Palestinian. So that's why a lot of people in power are losing their minds over campus protests and all of this stuff. So I think when that generational change is showing in the media, a lot of younger journalists, a lot of people of color, Ta-Nehisi Coates, one of the most respected black voices in journalism, comes out and says apartheid, calls this stuff out. People lose their minds because this has not happened before. So the changes are happening, but it will take a lot of time and there's going to be resistance, of course.
Is there also a problem with the way that the American media just approaches the news, right? Like when I see the kind of stuff you do, I think that's a kind of uniquely British way of
adversarial journalism.
It's adversarial, and it's not like both sidesism. It's not always trying to kind of do a monkey balance. You say it for what it is. And I don't know if the American media, like even now, to call out Trump's falsehoods or to say what's happening in Gaza is genocide or whatever, even if you don't want to use the G word.
Well, actively going out of the way to ban that word.
Right. But it seems like that's just a kind of an entrenched editorial culture.
100%. And
which is
and that's for something I fought against.
I don't know if it's changing, but
it's changing. So some of the tougher interviews you've seen, I think, and I don't want to sound like an egomaniac here, but I do think people like me and Jonathan Swan, who came here from Australia, did that famous interview with Trump. I think that some of it, and you see some BBC interviewers go viral interviewing an American, but I do think some American interviewers have over the last few years said, okay, we need to change our style a bit. And we've seen a slightly tougher interviews happening now. Sometimes you see tougher clips and you're like, okay, this didn't happen 4 or 5 years ago. So I do want to be positive. We can't always just be negative. I think there are some positive changes, but not enough. And I think you're right about the editorial culture. I would go one step further than this. It's not just about, can you say genocide or not? I don't even care if they say genocide or not. I just want to know, why is it that when American politicians come on, when a government member comes on TV, you're not even asking basic questions about civilian casualties, war crimes, the Leahy Law, the Foreign Assistance Act, the United Nations. The interviews are done not in a very forensic way, not in a detailed way. Like Lindsey Graham, let me give you one quick example. Lindsey Graham, right-wing Republican senator, goes on TV and says crazy anti-Palestinian stuff. I've not seen, he's always on TV. I've not seen one interview where an interviewer just goes through, all right, this family were killed. Do you support that? This bomb was dropped. This American bomb was dropped on a hospital. Do you support that? I've not seen that done. I would just like to see that done.
No, I put people on the spot. I imagine, I see those interviews and I can imagine you watching it, gnashing at your teeth.
And I did one right here, which went viral with Congressman Dean Phillips, who was at the time running as a primary candidate against Biden, or just afterwards. And he's very pro-Israel. And I went through it and I played clips and I said, respond to this. Right. It's not rocket science. I don't go around bragging that I'm some genius. Anyone can do this if you want to, if you can get out of that culture that you identified. Cautious.
On the other side, though, I feel like, and this is a dilemma that I've been grappling with because I've also reported from Israel. I was there in 2014 during the war, the 2014 Gaza war, and I just came back after reporting on 1 year of the war, of this war, which is how you tackle the question of Hamas. Because I feel that what tends to happen is that Hamas gets demonized by the right, or just generally by the mainstream Western media, and they kind of get invisibilized by the left. That when you bring them up, it's either one or the other. Do you feel that you are able to sort of walk that tightrope, or do you also feel, like sometimes I feel, that I'm not fully able to maintain that kind of, which is again clear, just to be clear, this is not false equivalence. No, it's a clear asymmetry. No, but even within that.
It's a good question. I think the problem is, and Ta-Nehisi Coates made this point when they asked him this question, you don't talk about Hamas in your book. You don't talk about all the terrorism. He says, there's enough people doing that. Right? He says there's enough people doing that. The American media is not lacking of voices,
but in a very
talking about Hamas and
but in a very kind of exaggerated, demonized way.
Agreed.
So like a nuanced conversation.
The problem with the nuanced conversation, I think, in this war compared to 2014. So, for example, in previous wars, I talked much more about Hamas. I'll openly say I've talked less about Hamas on this show.
Sure.
There's a simple reason why. There's a genocide going on, right? Just in the priorities of journalism. I can have a great discussion on this show about Hamas, the future of Hamas, the leadership of Hamas, terrorists, not terrorists, great. But at the same time, there's a cost to that in terms of time and resources, where northern Gaza right now is being starved to death. Right? And I think that is quite important. And I think Ta-Nehisi makes a good point that, the priorities of journalists right now, I see my priority. I'm not hiding my opinions. I'm not hiding my biases.
Sure.
I believe my priorities right now is to elevate Palestinian voices, to elevate voices against the genocide, to talk about international law, because that is not what's being done by the mainstream media. I can get 3 people from cable news to have the same discussion with me that they're already having. I don't think that adds anything. I do think people, yes, there is an invisibility to Hamas. And I think that's partly because the Israelis have been so extreme this time around. You remember in previous conflicts, but there was a lot more Hamas this, Israel that. Hamas, there's no comparison right now.
No, but Mehdi, even in 2014, when I was in Gaza and we happened to film a Hamas team assembling and firing rockets from our hotel next door, from the apartment building where we were living, that just happened by chance that we happened to see that. We were doing, through that war, what every other journalist was doing, which is just running from one Israeli strike to the next. You run from a UN shelter to a school to an apartment complex or whatever, even though Hamas is firing rockets from all around us. So we just got lucky and we put it out, and then, the shit hit the fan, and we got a lot of flack from,
I remember. And the Israelis,
those on the side of
the Israelis very much liked your clip.
They loved it. Netanyahu had a press conference, he played it and whatnot. That's kind of stayed with me. Like, that's tormented me, because on one hand, as a journalist, you see something, you report it. Then it gets spun into propaganda. But I feel like even then, there were other people around, there were other cameras. No one else put it out, partly because of fear, partly because of reprisal.
Yeah, of course.
Also, you don't want to kind of make the narrative more complex, right? Because it's largely about Israeli atrocities.
Unfortunately.
But Hamas does do that stuff.
Yes.
So
I want to never do. There are people on the pro-Palestinian side who will deny that. I've never denied Hamas war crimes. I've been very consistent in saying what happened on October 7th involved war crimes by Hamas, hostage taking. A war crime, taking children hostage is always unjustifiable. Killing civilians. The issue then becomes, though, that, as you just said, we're way past the 1-year anniversary. The world did not begin or finish on October the 7th.
Sure.
We've had a year of absolute atrocities of the 21st century.
So my dilemma it's not just about sort of calling out Hamas or condemning Hamas. There's that whole game as well.
Yes.
But it's about the wider question of then how do you move towards a point which is a sort of day after point, right?
Yes.
And when you look at the Palestinian leadership, whether it's the PA or Hamas, not in great shape. I mean, these aren't great choices for Palestinians. And people like Rashid Khalidi, who's the Edward Said Chair of Modern Arab Studies at Columbia, and for those who don't know, the foremost experts on the Palestinian question, has been scathing of both the PA and of Hamas. And in his book, 100 Years War on Palestine, which I'm sure you and many of your viewers may have read, he talks in the end about how it's time for Palestinians to forge a new deal, to move away from these groups, to try and start a conversation within Israel, to try and start a conversation here in the US, as you mentioned, reach out to important stakeholders, something they haven't done for 100 years, to reach out to new actors like India and China. And I was thinking, those are great suggestions, but who's going to do that? Who is that Palestinian voice or leadership that's going to be able to do that? So, and to me, that's
there's always that question.
Sort of challenge of,
and then there's always a danger. And I know I'm not suggesting you're doing this, but there's always a danger of like the classic Israeli talking about, where is the Palestinian Mandela?
Yes.
Where is the Palestinian Gandhi? And I wrote about this 12, 13 years ago.
Right.
There have been plenty of Palestinian Gandhis and Mandelas. They were killed by Israel. Right? This is the problem. Right now, Marwan Barghouti is regarded as a leader who would bring peace about between the two countries.
Sure.
He's sitting in an Israeli prison on what many regard as trumped-up murder charges. So the leadership of the Palestinians is a problem. But again, for me, I'm very blunt about the fact that it's a secondary issue.
Yeah.
Like, we're in a genocide. Who leads the Palestinians is irrelevant when they're being killed at record numbers every day. When Oxfam says women and children are being killed in Gaza at a greater rate than any other conflict in recent decades, for me, it's like, well, who cares who the leader is? The Israelis are going to be the Israelis. For me, it is the asymmetry that you mentioned earlier. The conversation has to be about Israel. They want to make it about everyone but Israel. They want to make it about Mahmoud Abbas. They want to make it about Hamas. They want to make it about October 7th. They want to make it about college campuses.
Sure.
Fundamentally, though, it's about occupation. I said this to Piers Morgan recently. Oh, what would you? It's about the occupation. You want to dodge from that. All roads lead back to the occupation. And when people say, well, you can't trust Hamas, you can't trust Israel. Okay, fine. Do the Reagan thing. Trust but verify, right? Do a peace deal. Pull out of the occupied territories. If they carry on fighting after there is actual peace and justice, as agreed on by international law, then you can go on and on about this stuff. Right. But until then, it's a side issue.
So you've been scathing about the American media's coverage of the war.
Yes.
If you look at the elections,
Atrocious.
Do you feel that there is now a greater acknowledgement of the threat, at least within the non-sort of right-wing mainstream media here, of the threat that Trump poses, and that he's being held to account much more so than earlier?
No.
Do you see a shift?
No, sadly, I see.
You don't see
I see one step forward, two steps back often. I see some pieces. Again, I can find for you one or two pieces or headlines here and there.
Wasn't that surely?
Okay, 5 or 6, 7 or 8. In the hundreds of pieces that are churned out every day, no, I think the balance is still to treat him as a normal candidate, to treat him as a normal politician, to treat it as two choices. And I think, if you follow the NYT Pitchbot Twitter account, which is a hilarious parody of the New York Times, he often says, I've got nothing left to do. This is beyond parody, some of the headlines that are put out.
Sane washing, I think it's called.
Sane washing, where they take his crazy rallies where he rambles and says racist, violent stuff, and they'll put out, oh, he did a detour on his real tour. Or he gave a sharp comments about the vice president when he says rambling BS. I think one classic example of it was after he was almost assassinated with the gunshot, where you had, I think Politico put out a story saying, we will see a new side of Trump at the Republican, more spiritual, softer, more spiritual, calm. Obviously, we didn't see that side, but not only did we not see that side, we knew we wouldn't. And that headline was ridiculous. That piece was ridiculous. I think there are a lot of journalists who still don't quite get it. If they do get it, they have bosses who don't let them get it. If they do write a good piece, the headline is awful. I think the general approach is still one of, these are two parties, these are two choices, rather than, here's this person running for office who is completely unhinged, violent, unqualified, and shouldn't be in the race. Remember, the New York Times, if you want one piece of evidence for this, the New York Times did an editorial calling for Joe Biden to leave the race before they did an editorial calling for Donald Trump to leave the race. That to me is insane. That is twice impeached, criminally convicted, openly violent, openly fascistic.
Which is kind of crazy for us, right? When we come from outside this country and we look at the contrast here, and we're not holding a brief for A or B candidate, but just on merit. This should be a fairly no-brainer situation. It's neck and neck. Not only is it neck and neck, at times it seems like Trump is ahead.
It shouldn't be. That's exactly my point. He shouldn't even be neck and neck. No normal country would be neck and neck. When I went to the UK last year on a book tour, I was on BBC's Radio Today program, the main morning show. And they said, well, it's going to be DeSantis, right? And I said, no, it's going to be Trump. It can't be Trump. Trump is facing trials. And I said, no, it'll be Trump. The party for Trump. DeSantis got no chance. People couldn't understand, A, the enduring popularity of Trump on the right, and the control he has over the party, and B, the idea that Americans are over. Surely Republicans are smart enough not to put forward Trump. By the way, let me just say this to you. It's 50-50 right now. I do believe that if Republicans have put forward a Nikki Haley type, they'd be in the lead. I actually think, in some senses, I'm very scared that a fascist is about to win, and it shouldn't be this close. Part of me, though, sometimes thinks, thank God it's Trump, because if they put a more moderate candidate forward, they'd be far in the lead.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. But
he's his own worst enemy, right?
Right. But to the point about the media's coverage, do you think partly this kind of reluctance to say it for what it is also because they're learning their lessons from last time, where there was this whole sense in which they had kind of alienated a whole chunk of the country. They were seen as elite, and you need to kind of try and be more broad. You need to reach out.
That's kind of liberal, kind of self-flagellation bullshit. I don't buy that.
No.
The reality is, a lot of the people who are in for, let's take Politico, for example, it's owned by Axel Springer. The people in charge of that are very pro-Trump. Let's be clear. A lot of the executives who own media organizations in this country like less regulation. They like lower taxes. Elon Musk is not supporting Donald Trump because he believes in MAGA. Elon Musk is supporting Donald Trump because it's his fellow billionaire who's going to do Elon Musk favors. Let's just not forget some old-fashioned materialistic principles.
Okay.
A lot of these media organizations are run by rich folks who like the idea of a Republican power, and they're willing to sacrifice American democracy for another tax cut.
Okay, so fine. So you're saying that it's not because they're trying to broaden the editorial footprint, but let me put this another way.
A little bit on the fringes, but that's not the driving principle.
Okay, but let me take it another direction.
If that was the case, by the way,
right?
If they so much cared about diversity of opinion, where is their coverage that reflects Black opinion, Latino opinion, Muslim opinion, working class opinion that's not pro-Trump, labor unions? None of that's there. It's just always 12 Trump voters in a diner in rural Mississippi. Like, that's the kind of cliched New York Times.
Okay, so how do you then tackle the other kind of related question of the polarization, though, where you look at the media and you look at the silos? Are you worried about, like, in terms of just your own space and what you're doing? 100%. Hear me out. Yeah, that you're doing your stuff, but it is still reaching out or is largely being consumed by a bubble.
Yes.
And if you look at also the sort of voices you get on, and I've been following some of your stuff, you get interesting people, but they largely seem to be on the left or within your own sort of, your own editorial, I guess, imagination. And it's almost like the other side doesn't come, right? Yeah. Probably doesn't want to come.
So
which is a problem that we in NDTV faced as well.
Yes.
The BJP boycotted us for years.
Yes.
Till we got taken over, and now, of course, they love us. But, or I shouldn't say us, actually, I'm not there anymore. It's more of a habit.
I was going to correct you.
But that's, like, what's the maneuver there?
Hold on. So there's two different things you've identified. One is people in silos, in echo chambers, which predates Trump. It's a social media problem. I think our social media overlords have to take some responsibility for that in terms of the algorithms driving people into silos, in the way YouTube feeds up all sorts of nonsense to you further right. So I think social media has played a big role in driving people into silos. You remember the Brexit referendum, which was several months before Trump.
Sure.
Liberals woke up saying, but how could the UK have voted for Brexit? All of my friends are anti-Brexit. Well, you were in a very small, sheltered space.
Right.
Now, that's undeniably true. That's one issue of polarization, which is driven by social media and also actually real world sorting. There's a lot of data that people will move to neighborhoods where people of their own party, their kids will marry people only. There's a whole different polarization issue going on. That's separate to the point you identify, which is about interviews and media accountability, which is in a space now where there's a big bunch of far right-wing media, which is not really media. I don't consider Fox a news operation. Certainly don't consider Newsmax a news operation. For Republicans, and I'm talking about Republicans here, it is very easy to go to a safe space. Why go on a Sunday show or why come on an interview with me and get tough questions, fact-based questions, when you can go on Fox and get a massage? Right? This is the problem now. And it's been a problem for MSNBC. It's been a problem for mainstream media for a while. We know what CNN did to try and get Republicans back. They started saying, they started going softer on Republicans under Chris Lick. That was a very deliberate strategy, and now it's worked. All these Republicans are back on air. There's two problems, right? Number one, people say, well, why doesn't the New York Times have a pro-Trump columnist, right? They should have a MAGA columnist. They have these never-Trump Republicans. Very simple answer to that. The Trump side doesn't live in reality. That's a fact. This small 30-40% of MAGA America with their leaders are deluded. They're unhinged. They lie for a living. This is objective. So if you hold on. If you're the New York Times, how do you publish a pro-Trump columnist? You wouldn't be able to fact check the piece.
Right.
You wouldn't be able to put out the piece. It's not true. Half of the stuff.
So if you take the 30-40% away and you've got the middle, right? So it's back and forth. Are you concerned that in terms of like the product you're doing, the work you're doing, that's not reaching that middle? That is, it's playing to the 30-40% of the other?
No, I don't think that's the case. As I said, we had Dean Phillips on the show as a congressman. We had a very fervent discussion. My very first show in the studio was with Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, centrist, center-right Israeli politician. We had a back and forth. I'd also do a show for Al Jazeera, as you know, called Head to Head.
Yeah.
I just interviewed a Trump guy on that show. And it was a reminder of how hard it is to do Trump interviews because they don't live in a shared reality.
Yeah.
And for them, it's a game. They'll laugh and wink and say outrageously provocative things that they know aren't true. And you are left wondering, was there any value to doing this interview? And I always ask that question. I remember doing Ram Madhav the BJP on head-to-head years ago.
Yes.
And at the end of the show, it's like, he's kind of laughing, saying, I turned your show into Indian TV. Because the camera's up. Like, was there any value to that? Like, if it's just performative, right?
Yeah.
If you don't...
It's just for the viral clip.
But if the guest doesn't even believe what they're saying, which is the case with most MAGA folks, then it becomes a case of, this is not good faith journalism, not a good faith. Why am I wasting my subscribers' time with this? So I'd rather have some... I love disagreement. I wrote a book about arguing, debate, but it has to be a good faith debate. Right. It can't just be for the sake of...
But do you feel like this, just now talking commercially, because you said you're also wearing this business hat, that the kind of content you're putting out has enough of a footprint to be financially sustainable? Sorry, so how do you have a subscriber model?
So we have a subscriber model. We have people joining monthly or annually. Right. Yep. $6 a month if you sign up annually for Zeteo.
Okay.
Zeteo.com.
Is there a discount for Indians?
There is not a discount for Indians. There is a discount if you go annually. I can't have one partisan divide for my parents' country. But we do have a lot of Indian subscribers. We check the numbers.
So it's subscriber driven.
Subscriber driven.
You also have people, investors and whatnot.
We have investors that cover the cost, but we are subscriber driven.
Okay.
Think
that's
the plan. That's the plan, is to be sustainable in that way. We're doing very well at the moment. We're ahead of numbers. We didn't want to rely on an advertiser model, because when you're in the advertiser model, you're at the whims of advertisers.
Right.
When you're just on YouTube, you're at the whims of Google and YouTube as to whether they're going to shadow ban you. So we are on the Substack platform where we control our content, we control our videos. We actually do have freedom to publish what we want. And look, even with subscriber models, I want to be honest with you, some people will pretend and say, we're truly independent. Even with subscriber models, I, as an owner of the company, have to think about, am I going to lose subscribers because I do a clip people don't like? For example, this election, we're talking during the election season, people are very divided. On the left, in Muslim communities, much of our quote-unquote base are divided on whether Harris is the right candidate. Should you vote for Jill Stein? Is Donald Trump that bad? These are the kind of questions people are having. Sure, we try and reflect it in the breadth of our content. We're left, we're liberal left, we're center. We're not right.
Yeah.
And I have people canceling the subscription saying, well, I don't like this piece of content. Nothing. We're trying to do honest, independent, adversarial journalism. Not everyone will agree with everything we do.
Are you worried that if Trump comes to power, he's going to come after the media in the way that we are seeing in other countries, 100%. Including you and others? You think so?
Well, as for me, the Trump people have openly called me out by name and threatened me. Right. One guy who wants to be Trump's Attorney General, Mike Davis, tweeted that once I'm Attorney General, the first thing I will do is send Mehdi Hassan to Guantanamo Bay. Like, this is the stuff they say openly.
This is a tweet?
Tweet, open, public threats. Public threats. Look, he doesn't have the power to do that, but the point is, this is the language they're comfortable using, threatening journalists and immigrants with all sorts of unconstitutional...
But you think...
broader than me.
Yeah.
Trump has made it very clear he plans to target the media. He recently called out CBS. He said, I'm going to shut you down. NBC, you're traitors, treason. I'm going to go
New York licenses. Wait till you see what I do for
you. He's open. And by the way, again, he did this in office too. People say, oh, well, he was in office. In office, he threatened CNN. He incited violence against CNN. CNN got death threats from people who liked him.
Amazon.
He's been very open about his authoritarian agenda. And I try and explain to Americans, it's not like he's going to round up everyone on January 21st to put them in a camp. But he does love Viktor Orban, who has basically taken over the control of the media in Hungary. You look at the Erdogan model in Turkey, where his rich friends have taken over a lot of the independent media. You look at India, where Modi raided the BBC offices after they did a documentary with the tax police. Trump, we know, wants to use the IRS, the tax division in the US, the SEC, to go after small businesses, his opponents. This is what's coming, and it kills me that so many Americans don't see it coming.
You don't think that these institutions will have the ability to push back?
In some cases,
In some cases, they might.
Yeah. In some cases, but not all cases.
Because many of them
fascism is creeping. Right. And don't forget, Tim Snyder, the very famous historian of fascism at Yale, he has a phrase. He says, what people do when autocracy is coming is they obey in advance.
Right.
And we are seeing that now with media organizations who are reaching out to the Trump campaign, who are trying to get more Trump people on, who are basically self-censoring because they don't want to upset Trump, because they think he might win, and they think, keep our heads down. He won't come for us if we keep our heads down. That is obeying in advance. That's how the fascist wins. When the media, which is supposed to be independent, adversarial, says, we'd rather keep our heads down and have a quiet time. And we've seen that with Indian media in many ways.
What's your guess, Kamala or Trump? By the way, can you first do a masterclass on how to pronounce Kamala? It's America, it's Kamala. It's not Kamala.
It's not Kamala. We say Kamala.
You say Kamala.
Because America, but you're asking the wrong guy, because I'm a Brit in America. So I'm navigating multiple accents. The Americans, I don't know if you saw the DNC, her niece, Mina Harris, came on stage with the two little kids from the family, who then explained it's comma, like a comma.
Yes.
And that doesn't work for Brits, because then it would be Kamala Harris. But for Americans, it's comma, so Kamala Harris.
Republicans, actually Kamala.
Republicans go out of their way to say Kamala.
Come on, I know.
Because they want to, just like they do with Barack Obama, they want to highlight the foreign name and disrespect her. No, I think we all get the pronunciations wrong. I think it'll be interesting to see how they pronounce her once she's president. If she's president, look, I don't know if she's going to win. I stopped doing predictions in 2016. I didn't think Brexit would happen. I didn't think Trump would win. I was wrong on both counts. I learned my lesson. I can't do predictions anymore. The election is too close. The system is too dumb. The American system is one of the dumbest election systems in the world. The Electoral College makes no sense, and it could go either way.
It is crazy, actually, for the world's oldest democracy. For the
You're basically basing an election of 150, 60 million people on around 40, 50,000 people in 3 states.
Yeah.
It's insanity. And if anyone can predict what those 40, 50,000 people are going to do, good luck to you. Polls, we know, exaggerate certain effects, understate certain effects. Polls have often understated Trump's support. Yeah. So I always think whatever he's got in the polls,
and also
he's got more.
Structurally, like you don't have a federal election commission.
No, there's no
media calls the election. I mean, it's mind-blowing to us.
There's no common national standards.
Yeah.
Every state gets to do
their own thing. Yeah.
And the Republicans have abused that power to then suppress the vote in certain places.
Yeah.
They limit the number of ballot boxes, mail-in boxes in certain places. We know that. So no, I can't predict the election. There's 2 to 3 weeks to go. It's neck and neck in the polls. National polling, by the way, remind your audience, means nothing. It only matters what happens in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona.
Okay, Mehdi Hassan, you won't do a prediction. Will you at least do a ghazal before we end?
I can't sing, sadly. I may have his name, but my voice is awful. I won't torture your viewers or listeners with that.
All right. Well, anyway, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.